At 11:47 p.m., Olivia Bennett, CEO of a billion-dollar company, stood barefoot in her kitchen, poured a glass of wine she never drank, and took a photo of herself smiling. Not for the board, not for the press, just to see if she still could. She meant to send it to her sister. She sent it to a stranger. Yeah. And that stranger, a black single father named Daniel Brooks, who hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days, read her message, stared at her photo, and whispered something into the dark that would change both their lives. What did he say? Drop your city in the comments. Let me know how far this story has reached. And if no one's told you today, you deserve to feel something real. Subscribe, because this one goes deep. The alarm didn't wake Daniel Brooks. He was already awake. He'd been awake since 3 a.m. sitting at the kitchen table of his apartment in South Chicago, staring at a pile of bills that didn't care how hard he worked, how little he slept, or how many prayers he'd sent up since Sandra died. The bills just sat there, flat and patient. The way debt always is, it never rushes because it knows it'll win eventually. Daniel pressed both palms flat on the table. And he was 41 years old. He had $214 in his checking account. His son Marcus had a doctor's appointment on Friday that wasn't covered by insurance, not the specialist kind anyway, and the overtime hours Daniel had counted on at the warehouse had just been cut. Again. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. There was a text from his mother. "You eating right, Marcus? Okay?" He didn't answer. Not because he didn't love her, but because he didn't know how to say no. And yes at the same time, without worrying her. He stood up, walked to the small hallway outside Marcus's room, and pushed the door open just enough to see his boy sleeping. Marcus was 8 years old, and he slept the way only children can completely. Without armor, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress, his breathing slow and even. His sneakers were by the door. One of the laces had been retied 3 times because Marcus had learned to do it himself, and he was proud of that, even though it always came loose by noon. Daniel watched him for a long moment. That's why he thought, "That's the only reason I'm still standing." He pulled the door closed, went back to the kitchen, and turned on the coffee maker. Even though it was 3 a.m., and the coffee was going to taste like burnt regret. He drank it anyway, standing at the counter, looking at nothing. This was the life. This was what it had become. He wasn't complaining. He'd told himself that 1,000 times. Men like him didn't complain. Men like him had fathers who worked 2 jobs and never said a word, who came home tired and still helped with homework, who died early from the kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up on a death certificate, but everybody in the family knows put them in the ground. Daniel wasn't going to be that man. But some mornings, some 3 a.m. mornings, he sat in that kitchen and felt the loneliness pressing down on him like something physical, like a hand on the back of his neck. Not pushing, just holding, reminding him it was there. Sandra had been gone for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. He'd stopped counting after the first year. He lied to himself about that too. Across the city, 43 floors up, in a glass building that cost more per square foot than Daniel's entire apartment building, Olivia Bennett was also awake. She was always awake. In sleep was something that happened to other people. People who hadn't built a company from the ground up. People who hadn't spent 15 years proving that a woman in rooms full of men, who smiled at her face while they talked over her voice, could not just sit at the table, but own the table, the chairs, and the building around it. Olivia had earned everything in that penthouse, every piece of furniture, every view, every silence. The silence was the problem. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, with a glass of Malbec, a $200 bottle she'd opened because she'd told herself she deserved it, and stared at the city lights below. Chicago breathed beneath her. All those tiny moving pieces, cars, people, lives stacked on top of each other. She thought, does anyone down there feel like this? Like everything you worked for is exactly what you wanted, and somehow that's the loneliest sentence in the English language. She turned from the window. Her phone sat on the kitchen island. She picked it up, scrolled through her messages, 12 unread, all work, and then stopped at her camera roll. She'd taken a photo earlier that night almost by accident. She'd been cooking, actually cooking, not ordering, in which she did maybe twice a year, and she'd burned the garlic and laughed at herself alone in the kitchen. And in that moment of laughing, she'd looked almost human. She'd taken the photo because she wanted proof. Proof that she still laughed. That she still had moments that weren't about quarterly projections and investor calls and the constant grinding performance of being Olivia Bennett, CEO. In the photo, she was leaning against the counter. No blazer, no board meeting posture. Just a white t-shirt, dark jeans, and a half smile that reached her eyes for the first time in she didn't know how long. She looked at it for a full minute. Then she opened her messages to her sister Claire, typed, "Honestly, is it beautiful?" and hit send. She didn't notice she'd tapped the wrong name. She set her phone face down on the counter and went back to the window. Daniel's phone buzzed. He looked at it the way he looked at everything at 3 a.m., with the slow, dulled attention of a man running on bad coffee and worn-out patience. Unknown number. Chicago area code. He almost ignored it. He should have ignored it. Instead, something made him pick up the phone. Maybe boredom, maybe the specific loneliness of that hour, maybe just the simple human instinct to reach for something when everything else feels out of reach, and he opened the message. It was a photo. A woman, standing in a kitchen, leaning against a counter. She was smiling, not the kind of smile people put on for cameras, but the kind that happens when you're not thinking about being watched. Dark hair loose around her face. Something tired in her eyes, but something warm in the smile itself. She was beautiful. He didn't let himself sit with that thought for more than a second. Wrong number, he told himself. She meant to send this to someone else. He looked at the message beneath the photo. Honestly, is it beautiful? He stared at those words. He should have typed, "Sorry, I think you have the wrong number." He should have put the phone down and finished his terrible coffee and gone to lay down, even though he wouldn't sleep. He didn't do any of that. He typed back 4 words. "Yes, it is." He sent it before he could think about it. Then he put the phone down and stood there, half certain she'd realize her mistake and never respond. Half certain he'd just done something quietly foolish. His phone buzzed again. "Oh God, wrong number. I'm so sorry." He almost smiled, didn't. He typed, "It's fine. Happens." A pause. Long enough that he figured that was the end of it. Then, "That's mortifying." "Why?" he typed. "You look fine." Again. He could have said great. He'd almost typed great, but something made him hold back, some instinct that said easy. Don't make this something it isn't. Another pause. Fine. Well, that's something. He felt a corner of something in him, something that hadn't moved in a long time. Shift slightly, like a door opening an inch. He typed, "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it?" He looked at the photo again. At the smile. At the tiredness behind it that she probably didn't know was there. He typed, "I meant you look like a person. Not like whatever you were trying to look like. Just a person." The pause this time was longer. He thought I said too much. She's gone. Then, "That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time. Which is a little sad, actually." "Yeah," he typed. "It is." Numb. What happened over the next hour, Daniel could not have explained to anyone. Not to his mother, not to his co-worker Jerome, not to the grief counselor he'd seen 3 times after Sandra died before he couldn't afford the copay anymore. He couldn't explain it because it didn't make any rational sense. 2 strangers, 12 texts, A wrong number photo sent at midnight. And somewhere in those 12 texts, something opened up in Daniel Brooks that he hadn't let anyone near since the morning he sat in a hospital corridor and a doctor told him that his wife wasn't going to make it. The woman she told him her name was Olivia had a way of asking questions that didn't feel like questions. She didn't ask, "How are you?" the way people do when they're being polite and don't actually want to know. She said things like, "What were you doing when my message came in?" And, "Do you usually answer unknown numbers at 3 a.m.? He told her the truth. That he'd been sitting at his kitchen table not sleeping. That he'd been looking at bills. That it was the only quiet hour he got in a day that wasn't quiet enough. She didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "That sounds hard." She said, "I know that kind of quiet. The kind that's too loud." And Daniel had to put the phone down for a second because that sentence hit something inside him that he hadn't known he was carrying. The kind that's too loud. Yes, that was exactly it. That was the 3 a.m. feeling. The silence that wasn't silent at all. The silence full of everything he couldn't say out loud. He picked the phone back up. "Who did you mean to send that to?" he typed. "My sister." What would she have said? A long pause. She would have said yes, but she would have meant, "You look tired, Liv. Go to sleep." "You do look tired," Daniel typed. "I know. So go to sleep." "Can't." "Yeah," he typed. "Me neither." He asked what she did. She hesitated. He could feel it in the pause, and then told him. CEO, technology company, 1,100 employees, annual revenue in the billions. He read it twice. "Still there," she typed. "Yeah," he typed. "Just recalibrating." What does that mean? He thought about how to say it honestly. "It means you don't sound like that." "What do I sound like?" "Like somebody trying to figure out if a photo is beautiful at midnight. That's not CEO behavior." She sent back, "Ha." Just that. Just ha. But he got the feeling it was a real one. A real laugh. Small, surprised, genuine. "What do you do?" she asked. He told her. Warehouse work mostly. Some delivery shifts when the hours were there. A son 8 years old with a developmental disability that made every day its own kind of marathon. A life that was nothing like hers, and everything like the lives of half the men he'd grown up around. He waited for the conversation to cool for the polite withdrawal that happened when people of different worlds got too close to each other and realized the distance. It didn't come. "What's his name?" she asked. "Marcus." "Is he sleeping right now?" "Yeah, like the world doesn't exist." "That's the most peaceful thing I've heard all week," she typed. And then after a moment, "Tell me something about him." Daniel looked down the hallway toward his son's door. He typed, "He learned to tie his shoes last month. First time. Took him 6 weeks, and he cried the first time he did it by himself. Not sad crying. Like release crying. Like he'd been holding something and finally got to put it down." He stared at what he'd written and almost deleted it. Too much, maybe. Too personal. He sent it anyway. Her response came quickly. "That's the most honest thing I've heard anyone say in a very long time." He didn't reply to that. There wasn't anything to say. Sometimes a thing lands, and you just let it sit. "I have a board meeting in 5 hours," she typed eventually. "You should sleep." "I should do a lot of things." "So should I." Another pause, comfortable this time. The kind that doesn't need filling. "This was strange," she typed. "Yeah?" he agreed. "Not bad strange." "No," he said. "Not bad. Good night, Daniel." He looked at his name on the screen. She'd used it like she'd known him. Not careful about it. Just Daniel. "Good night, Olivia." He put the phone down. He sat in the kitchen for another 10 minutes, doing nothing, feeling something he couldn't name settle very quietly in his chest. Not hope. He wasn't ready to call it that. Just air. like something had opened up and let a little air in. He went to bed at 4:15. He slept until Marcus woke him at 6:30, climbing onto the bed and pressing his face against Daniel's shoulder, the way he always did. "Dad? I'm here, bud. You sleep okay?" Daniel put his arm around his son. "Yeah," he said. "Better than usual." The problem with real things is they don't stay small. Daniel went through his week. The warehouse. The pickup and drop-off at Marcus's school. The Thursday night call with Marcus's occupational therapist. The cracked taillight on his car he'd been putting off fixing for 3 weeks. The grocery run where he stood in the cereal aisle for 4 minutes doing math in his head. He did not text Olivia Bennett again. He told himself there was no reason to. Wrong number. Accidental conversation. Nice moment. That was all. She had a billion-dollar company and a penthouse and a board meeting she'd walked into on 5 hours of sleep. She wasn't thinking about him. He was not going to be the man who texted a stranger twice. On Thursday night, after Marcus was down, and the apartment was quiet, and he was sitting at that same kitchen table with that same pile of bills and his phone face up next to his coffee, a message came in. Unknown number. Same Chicago area code. "I told you that was mortifying, and you made it less so. I've been thinking about that, and I think you deserve to know." He read it 3 times. Then he typed, "You've been thinking about a conversation we had 4 days ago. I've been in 14 meetings since Monday. I thought about it between 11 of them." He laughed, out loud, alone in his kitchen. The sound surprised him, rough and real, like something shaking loose. He typed, "How'd the board meeting go?" "I survived it," which is the goal. Just surviving? That's the goal for a CEO. Some days, yes. He thought about that, about how that was the same word he used. Surviving. He'd thought it was only a word for people like him, people holding things together with both hands and a prayer. He hadn't imagined it applied to women in penthouses. "Yeah," he typed. "I know that feeling." "I thought you might," she said. "That's why I texted." It went like that. 3, 4 times a week. Sometimes just a few messages. Sometimes on the nights when neither of them could sleep, which happened more than Daniel wanted to admit, an hour, 2 hours, words moving back and forth in the dark, like something necessary. He told her things he hadn't said aloud since Sandra. About the day Sandra was diagnosed. About the way everything rearranged itself after that. Not all at once, but quietly, like furniture moving a half-inch at a time. Until one morning, you look up and the room doesn't look like yours anymore. About the specific weight of raising a child alone and loving it and hating the loneliness of it at the same time. About the way he caught himself sometimes talking to Sandra in his head. Not prayer, not grief exactly. Just habit. The habit of a person who was part of your thinking for 12 years. Olivia listened. She asked questions, not the kind that pushed, the kind that waited. And she told him things back, about the company she'd built from 3 employees in a rented office in 2009. About the specific experience which Daniel hadn't known he was curious about, until she described it, of being a woman in a room full of men who were rooting for her to fail, not because they were monsters, but because they needed her to confirm what they already believed. About the loneliness of being the person everyone needed to be strong, and how after 15 years of that, she'd forgotten how to just be a person in a room. "Do you have anyone you talk to?" he asked her one night in week 3. "Besides you?" "Yeah." A pause. "No," she said. "Not really. My sister. Sometimes. But she worries about me, and then I spend the whole conversation managing her worry, and it's not, I don't know. It's not real. It's me performing I'm okay for an audience that loves me." Daniel nodded at his phone. "I do that with my mother." "It's exhausting." "Yeah." "This isn't exhausting," she said. He didn't answer right away. "No," he finally typed. "It's not." He should have known it wouldn't stay quiet. He should have known because nothing in his life stayed quiet for long, and because the thing growing between him and Olivia, whatever it was, whatever he was refusing to name, was real enough that the world was going to notice it eventually. But he wasn't thinking about the world. He was thinking about a Thursday night conversation and a Saturday afternoon text she'd sent that just said, "Marcus, tie his shoes today." And how that small question that she remembered, that she'd remembered Marcus's name and the shoe story from their very first conversation, had sat in his chest all day like something warm. He was thinking about the way she signed off some nights with "talk tomorrow," and how he always said yes. He was not thinking about the fact that Olivia Bennett was not just a woman who couldn't sleep. She was a public figure, a name in business columns, a face that appeared in Forbes and Fortune and the Chicago Tribune business section. He was not thinking about any of that. He should have been. Because 3 weeks after that first accidental photograph, a journalist who covered Chicago's tech scene noticed something odd in Olivia Bennett's schedule. She'd declined 2 networking events she'd normally attended without question. She was arriving later to morning calls. Small things. Invisible things unless you were the kind of person paid to notice invisible things. The journalist had a source inside Olivia's company. And the source had seen something, just a glimpse, just a name on a phone screen left face up on a conference room table for 30 seconds that they filed away and began to investigate. Daniel didn't know any of this. He was at the warehouse that Friday morning running a pallet jack down the third aisle, thinking about Marcus's doctor's appointment and whether he could move his Saturday shift when his phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize, not Olivia's. The message read, "Mr. Brooks, my name is Kevin Marsh. I'm a journalist with the Chicago Examiner. I'd like to talk with you about your relationship with Olivia Bennett. Please call me at your earliest convenience." Daniel stopped walking. He read it again. He stood in the middle of that warehouse aisle under the fluorescent lights with the sound of machinery around him and a pallet jack in his hands, and he felt the floor shift slightly beneath his feet. Not earthquake shift. The other kind. The kind that tells you something is coming and there is nothing you can do to stop it now. He put his phone in his pocket and kept working. But his hands weren't steady anymore. And that night, when he texted Olivia, he typed and deleted 4 different versions of what he wanted to say before he finally just wrote, "We need to talk." Her response came fast, faster than usual. "I know," she said. "You already know. My head of communications told me an hour ago, Daniel, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen." He sat with that. "What exactly is happening?" he typed. "Someone inside my company has been watching. They saw your name. They're building a story." "What kind of story?" The pause this time was different, heavy. "The kind," she finally typed, "that won't be kind to either of us." Daniel put the phone down on the table. He looked around his apartment. The bills still there. Marcus's backpack by the door. The photograph of Sandra on the shelf above the TV. Her smile unchanged, unbothered by whatever was coming. He picked the phone back up. "My son," he typed. "Tell me they won't put Marcus in this." The pause this time was the longest she'd ever taken. And in that pause, Daniel Brooks understood exactly how deep they were already in. The pause lasted 11 seconds. Daniel counted. He didn't mean to count, but his mind had gone somewhere cold and mechanical, the way it did when something bad was happening, and he needed to not fall apart before he understood exactly how bad it was. 11 seconds. He knew, because he was staring at the clock on the microwave while he waited for Olivia to type back. When her message came, it wasn't what he'd hoped for. When her message came, it wasn't, "I don't know yet." That's the honest answer. I don't know what they have or how far they're willing to go. He stood up from the table, sat back down, stood up again. "Olivia." He typed her name like it was a question. "I know," she wrote back. "I know what you're asking." Then answer it. Another pause, shorter this time. My lawyer is already making calls. If they mention Marcus by name in anything they publish, we have grounds. I'm not going to let that happen. You're not going to let it happen, he repeated out loud to the empty kitchen in a voice he didn't recognize. Not angry. Something colder than anger. The voice of a man realizing that something he thought was private had been in someone else's hands the whole time, without him knowing. Daniel, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough right now. It's not about enough, he typed back. It's about my son. He's 8 years old. He didn't sign up for anything. Neither did you. No, he typed. I didn't. He put the phone face down on the table and pressed his palms flat against the surface the same way he had 3 weeks ago, when this all started, when his biggest problem was a pile of bills and a broken taillight and 4 hours of sleep. He almost laughed at that version of himself. That man had no idea. He picked the phone back up. Who is it? Who inside your company is doing this? I have a strong suspicion. I can't say yet. Can't or won't? Both, she said. And then after a beat, I'm going to fix this. How? I don't know yet, but Daniel... She paused mid-sentence, which she almost never did. I need you to know that whatever happens, I didn't use you. I wasn't using you for anything. He sat with that sentence for a long time. I know, he finally typed. And he did. That was the thing. He knew her well enough by now in the strange sideways way you can know someone you've never met face to face to know she wasn't performing. She was scared. Maybe for the first time in a long time, Olivia Bennett was genuinely scared of something she couldn't control. Get some sleep, he typed, if you can. You too. He didn't sleep at all. He lay on top of the covers in the dark with his phone on his chest, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios the way he used to run through spreadsheets when he still thought careful planning could protect you from everything. He thought about Marcus and how his son already carried enough weight for an 8-year-old, the appointments, the therapies, the stares from other kids, sometimes the extra patience required for a world that wasn't built for how Marcus's brain worked. He thought about what it would mean for Marcus's name, his face, his story to end up in some newspaper article next to words like scandal and CEO and secret relationship. His stomach turned. He got up at 5, made coffee, and sat at the table with his phone in front of him like it might ring at any moment with news he wasn't ready for. It rang at 6:47 a.m. Not Olivia, not the journalist. His sister-in-law, Renee, Sandra's younger sister who called every few weeks to check on Marcus, and who had a voice that always sounded like she was one sentence away from crying because she'd loved Sandra fiercely and had never fully put that grief down either. He answered, Danny. The way she said his name told him she already knew something. Renee. I saw something online this morning. She stopped. Is it true? His jaw tightened. What did you see? There's a gossip column. One of those tech industry ones. It's Danny. It says you've been having a relationship with some CEO. It doesn't say your last name yet, but it says... She stopped again. It mentions Marcus. The floor dropped out from under him. He grabbed the edge of the table. It mentions Marcus. It just says her source's young disabled son. It doesn't use his name, but Danny. Send me the link. I don't think you should. Renee, send me the link. She did. Bow. He read the article 3 times. It was short 4 paragraphs. A gossip column buried in a tech industry newsletter that probably had 40,000 subscribers on a good day. But 40,000 was 40,000. And gossip didn't need a large audience to travel. It needed one person with a larger platform to pick it up and run. Gay. The article didn't use his last name. It didn't use Marcus's name. But it described him precisely enough. Black, single-father warehouse worker, South Side Chicago, that anyone who knew him would know. And it described Olivia by name, by title, with a photo of her from a conference in 2023 looking exactly like what the article wanted her to look like powerful, polished, and apparently reckless. The headline read, "Bennett's After-Hours Connection Raises Questions About Leadership Judgment." He put the phone down on the table. He picked it up and texted Olivia one word, "Read it." She responded in under a minute. "I know. I'm already on a call with my legal team. Daniel, listen to me. They described my son." "I know." "They used the word disabled, like it's a detail in a story." "I know. A pause. Then, "I'm so angry I can barely type. And I understand if you are too. At me." He thought about that. Was he angry at her? He tested the feeling the way you press on a bruise to find where the pain actually lives. The anger was there, yes. But it wasn't aimed at Olivia. It was aimed at whoever sat in a glass office somewhere and made a calculated decision to use Marcus, an 8-year-old boy who'd worked for 6 weeks to learn to tie his shoes, as ammunition. "I'm not angry at you," he typed, "but I need to know what you're going to do. I'm going to find out who leaked it, and I'm going to handle it." What does handle it look like? "It looks like making very clear to certain people in my organization that there are lines," she wrote. "And it looks like making sure this doesn't go further." He exhaled slowly. "Olivia, I'm a warehouse worker in South Chicago. I don't have a legal team. I don't have a PR person. If this gets bigger, I have nothing." The response took a moment. "You have me," she wrote. "I know that might not feel like much right now, but you have me." He read that sentence twice. He didn't respond. He put the phone in his pocket and went to wake Marcus up for school. Standing in his son's doorway, watching Marcus blink awake and reach for his glasses on the nightstand, Daniel made himself a promise. Whatever came next, whatever storm this turned into, Marcus was not going to feel it. Marcus was going to have his breakfast and his backpack and his sneakers with the triple knotted lace and his ride to school, and none of the noise from the outside world was going to touch his morning. That was the one thing Daniel could control. That was the one wall he could build and hold. "Morning, bud." "Morning, Dad." Marcus squinted at him. "You look tired." "I'm fine." "You always say that." Daniel smiled, despite himself. "Put your glasses on straight, man." Marcus adjusted his glasses solemnly and swung his legs off the bed. And they ate breakfast. Daniel made eggs. Marcus talked about a book he was reading about space, specifically about Saturn's rings, which he'd decided were the greatest thing in the universe, and which he wanted to tell Daniel about in exhaustive detail. Daniel listened to every word. He nodded. He asked questions. He was fully there in that kitchen with his son and the eggs and Saturn's rings, while somewhere across the city a story was spreading through the internet like a crack through glass. He got Marcus to school at 7:52. 8 minutes early. He sat in the car for a while after Marcus disappeared through the school doors. His phone buzzed. Not Olivia this time. Jerome, his coworker from the warehouse. Jerome, who was 47 and had worked next to Daniel for 3 years, and who communicated primarily through short, direct sentences and the occasional shoulder pat. The text read, "Saw something online. You okay? People at work are talking." Daniel closed his eyes. Men and people at work were talking. He drove to the warehouse with his jaw set and his hands too tight on the wheel. When he walked into the locker room, 2 conversations stopped mid-sentence. He kept his face even. He'd learned how to do that, how to walk through a room where people had just been talking about you with his shoulders straight and his expression neutral, giving nothing away. Sandra used to say he had a poker face that could beat the house. He'd told her it wasn't a poker face. It was just the face he wore when he didn't have the energy to show people what they were doing. Jerome appeared at his elbow by the second aisle. "You need to talk." "I need to work," Daniel said. "Okay." Jerome walked with him for a minute. "For what it's worth, whatever it is, I don't think it's anybody's business." Daniel looked at him sideways. "I mean it," Jerome said. "People in there are going to have opinions. I just wanted you to know I'm not one of them." "Appreciate that. Also," Jerome lowered his voice. "There's a reporter outside in the parking lot. Saw him when I came in. Young guy. Notebook." The back of Daniel's neck went cold. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Okay." He worked through the morning with the specific grinding focus of a man who needs to not think. But by 10 o'clock, his phone had buzzed 14 times. 4 were from numbers he didn't recognize. 2 were from neighbors he barely talked to. 1 was from Marcus's school. Not an emergency, just a routine note about a field trip form, and that one hit him hardest somehow, because it was so ordinary, so completely unaware of everything crashing around it. Tja. At 10:23, Olivia texted, "I found out who leaked it." He stepped out of the aisle away from the machinery noise to read. "It's my VP of strategy, a man named Richard Coles. He's been positioning himself to take my chair for 2 years. He had someone watching my personal accounts, something I didn't know was possible given our IT agreements, which means he's violated about 6 different contracts." A pause. Then, "He thought if he made me look emotionally unstable, romantically distracted, the board would push me out. He used your name and Marcus's situation as the weapon." Daniel read it twice. Something went still in him. The specific stillness that isn't calm, but the opposite, the stillness before something moves. "What are you going to do?" he typed. "I already did something," she wrote. "I've been on the phone with our general counsel since 5 this morning. Coles is in a meeting with HR right now. He doesn't know I know it's him yet." A beat. He's about to find out. And the story. It's been picked up by 2 larger outlets. I can't stop it now. It's out there. Another pause. "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Ask. Are you going to be okay? Not fine. Actually, okay. He stood in the noise of the warehouse and looked at his phone. "I don't know yet," he typed. It was the most honest thing he'd said all morning. "That's the right answer," she wrote. "Hold on, I have to go. Something's happening." She went quiet for 40 minutes. He worked. He moved pallets. He kept his face even. When 2 co-workers glanced at him with expressions, he recognized the combination of sympathy and curiosity that people wear when they're trying to decide if they care more about your situation or the story of it. At 11:08, his phone buzzed again. Not Olivia. A text from the journalist Kevin Marsh. "Mr. Brooks, I understand you may have seen some early coverage. I want to give you the opportunity to share your perspective before our full piece goes live at 3 p.m. today. I'm outside your workplace if you'd like to speak." He typed back, "No comment." Marsh responded immediately, "We'll be including details about your son's condition as context for..." Daniel stopped reading. "Ma?" He walked to the warehouse manager's office and knocked. The manager, a large, quiet man named Sal, who'd given Daniel every available shift without being asked after Sandra died, looked up. "I need to leave early," Daniel said. "Family situation." Sal looked at him for a long moment. "I saw the thing online," he said quietly. "Take the day. I'll cover your hours." Daniel nodded. "I'll make it up." "I know you will." Sal waved him off. "Go handle your business." Yes. He was in his car in under 3 minutes. The reporter, young, wire-thin, with a press lanyard around his neck, stepped toward him from the parking lot edge. Daniel looked at him once got in the car and drove. Yay. He called Marcus's school. He spoke to the front office secretary, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who'd been there 22 years and who handled things with quiet efficiency. He told her there might be some press attention in the coming days. He told her that under no circumstances should anyone speak to a reporter about his son. Mrs. Patterson's voice went flat and professional, in the way of someone who'd protected children from adults her entire career. "Understood," she said. "I'll let security know. Thank you." He drove. He didn't go home. Home felt too visible, too still, too much like waiting. He drove toward the lake because he needed to think, and he couldn't think in rooms right now. His phone rang. Olivia's number. He answered. Her voice was different, not shaken. Olivia's voice never shook. He'd learned that much about her. But stripped, like she'd taken something off she'd been wearing all day. Richard Coles just resigned, she said. 20 minutes ago. He tried to deny it, and then our IT security showed him the access logs, and he stopped talking. A pause. It's done. He's gone. That's... Daniel exhaled. That's something. The story's still out there, she said. The resignation doesn't erase it. I know. Daniel. She said his name the way she'd been saying it for 3 weeks. Just his name, no performance around it. Can I ask you something else? Yeah. Are you alone right now? He looked out at the lake through the windshield. Gray sky. Dark water. The kind of November Chicago day that feels like the city is warning you about something. I'm in my car. Okay. A breath. I need to tell you something and I don't want to say it in a text. His grip tightened on the wheel. Say it. The second article, the one going up at 3, it's from a bigger outlet. They have more. They have... She stopped. Then they have screenshots of some of our conversations. Daniel, someone accessed my phone or my account. I don't know how yet, but they have messages. The car went very quiet. Which messages? He said slowly. The ones where you talked about Marcus, about the shoe tying, about... Her voice dropped. About Sandra. He said nothing for a long moment. They're going to print them, he said. It wasn't a question. Some of them. Framed to look... She paused. Framed to look like I was gathering emotional intelligence on a vulnerable man, like I manipulated you. He stared at the lake. Did you? He asked. The silence that followed was the longest one she'd ever left between them. No, she said finally. And the way she said it, quiet, clear, without defense or performance, hit him somewhere in the chest. No, Daniel, I didn't. What we talked about, I needed those conversations as much as you did. Maybe more. He believed her. He knew he believed her, because believing her was easy, and the things that are true are always easy to believe, even when they're inconvenient. Okay, he said. Okay. Yeah. He shifted in the driver's seat. So what do we do? Another pause. He could hear her breathing, could hear in the background the ambient noise of her office muffled voices, a door closing somewhere, the low hum of a world that didn't stop turning for personal crises. I've been thinking about that, she said. For the last 3 hours, while I was in legal meetings and HR meetings and crisis communications meetings, I've been thinking about what the right move is. A beat. And I think the right move is something my communications team is going to hate. What is it? The truth, she said. Just the truth. About what this was, what it is. Without framing it, without spinning it, without making it into a narrative that protects my image. Just the actual truth. He thought about that. Your board won't like that either. No, she agreed. They won't. Olivia. What? Dictuous. He looked at the dark lake. At the city he'd lived in his whole life. The city that had taken Sandra from him and given him Marcus and ground him down and held him up and never once asked him how he was doing. The city that was right now in some building somewhere preparing to print his grief in a newspaper and call it news. If you tell the truth, he said slowly, then our conversations, the real ones, they become public. Some of them already are. I mean all of it. Everything we talked about. Sandra, Marcus, the 3 a.m. stuff. He paused. You'd be exposing yourself. I know. And me. I know, she said again. Which is why I'm asking. Not telling. A breath. Daniel, I'm asking you. Can I tell the truth? He sat with the question. He thought about Marcus tying his shoes, about Sandra's photograph on the shelf, About Jerome in the warehouse saying I don't think it's anybody's business. About Mrs. Patterson saying understood in her flat professional voice. About Sal saying, go handle your business. Mère, he thought about how all of this started. A wrong number. A photograph. A woman who asked if it was beautiful, and a man who told her yes because it was, and because something in him had just needed for one moment, in a very long stretch of hard moments, to say something true. He thought about how tired he was of things being used as weapons that were meant to be human. Tell the truth, he said. She exhaled, long and slow. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said. We don't know what happens next. No, she agreed. We don't. He started the car. I'm going to pick up my son from school, he said, and I'm going to make him dinner. And I'm going to tell him that sometimes grown-up stuff gets complicated and it doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen to us. He paused. And I'm going to try to believe that while I'm saying it. Okay, she said quietly. Call me tonight, he said, after whatever happens at 3. I will. He hung up. He drove to Marcus's school. He was early pickup, wasn't for another 90 minutes, so he parked and sat and watched parents trickle in and out of the lot. Ordinary people running ordinary errands, completely untouched by the storm that was about to hit at 3 o'clock. He thought about what Olivia had said. The truth. Just the truth. It sounded simple. It never was. At 2:58, his phone buzzed. A news alert from a source he followed. He read the headline. Then he locked the screen and put the phone in the glove compartment. He needed 2 more minutes of quiet before it all changed. He gave himself exactly that. Then Marcus came through the school doors, backpack bouncing glasses, slightly crooked, and Daniel got out of the car and met him on the sidewalk, and Marcus looked up and said, "You're early." "Yeah," Daniel said. "How come?" Daniel put a hand on his son's shoulder and turned him toward the car. "Let's go home," he said. "I'll tell you about it." Marcus considered this seriously the way he considered everything. "Is it bad?" Daniel thought about Olivia's voice on the phone, about the truth she was about to tell in front of people who didn't want to hear it, about the storm that was already in motion and couldn't be called back. "It's complicated," he said, "but we're going to be okay." Marcus nodded once, accepting this the way he accepted most things completely, without needing it to be simpler than it was. They got in the car. Daniel pulled out of the lot. And at 3:01 p.m. somewhere across the city, the article went live. The article had 47,000 shares by 4 p.m. Daniel knew this because Jerome texted him the number like a warning shot, with no other words attached, just the number and a single period. 47,000 in 1 hour. He sat at his kitchen table and looked at that number and felt something shift in his chest. Not panic, not yet, but the sensation of a door closing somewhere that he hadn't noticed was open until it shut. Marcus was in the living room doing homework. Daniel could hear him humming to himself the low, tuneless sound his son made when he was concentrating, when the world had narrowed down to just the paper in front of him and the pencil in his hand. That sound was the only thing keeping Daniel in his chair, instead of pacing holes in the floor. But his phone had rung 11 times in the last hour. He'd answered 2 of them. One was his mother, whose voice had gone to that particular quiet register she used when she was trying very hard not to say what she actually thought. She said, "Daniel, what is going on?" Not a question. A reckoning. "Ma," he said. "I'm not asking for a story," she said. "I'm asking if you're okay." "I'm fine." "Boy." A pause. "I raised you. Don't tell me fine." He closed his eyes. "I'll explain everything. Not right now. Tonight." "You better." Another pause, softer. "Marcus okay?" "He doesn't know anything." "Good," she said. "Keep it that way as long as you can." And then before he could respond, "I'm proud of you. Whatever this is, whatever they're saying, I know who you are. Don't let them make you forget." He had to wait a moment before he could speak again. "Thanks, Ma. Call me tonight." She hung up. The second call he'd answered was from a number he didn't recognize. A woman who identified herself as a producer for a local news segment who wanted to know if he'd be willing to sit for a brief on-camera interview. He said no. She said she understood. She called back 4 minutes later from a different number. He stopped answering. At 4:23, Olivia texted, "Board emergency meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. My communications director just quit." He read it twice. "Your communications director quit." She said she couldn't defend a CEO who was about to, and I'm quoting, blow up her own image with honesty. She said it like honesty was a pre-existing condition. A beat. She's not wrong about what I'm about to do. She's just wrong about why. What happens at the board meeting? Also, they're going to ask me to issue a denial, a carefully worded statement that reframes our conversations as a misunderstanding, that positions you as I don't know a constituent outreach something sterile and explainable. The pause that followed was tight. They want me to make you smaller so I look bigger. Daniel's jaw went hard. And you're not going to do that. No, she said. I'm not. He looked toward the living room, where Marcus was still humming. Olivia, I need you to understand something. Tell me. If you go into that room tomorrow and say something real, something true, they're going to come back at you twice as hard. People like that, when you don't give them the narrative they want, they build their own. And the one they build is always worse. I know, she said. I'm not trying to talk you out of it. I know that too. I'm just telling you, he said, that the truth has a price. I've been paying it my whole life. It doesn't get cheaper just because you decide to tell it. Silence. Then, you sound like you've done this before. Telling the truth in a room full of people who don't want to hear it. He exhaled slowly. Yeah, I've done it. She didn't ask him to explain. She just said, then you know it's still worth it. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the photograph of Sandra on the shelf, at her smile, at the way she'd always looked directly at the camera, never sideways, like she refused to be caught in anything less than her full attention. Yeah, he said finally. It is. They stayed on the phone for another 12 minutes without saying much else. He could hear her moving around in her office, the sound of papers, of something being poured water, or something stronger, he couldn't tell. She could hear Marcus start singing a fragment of something in the other room, a made-up song that went nowhere and meant everything. He's got a good voice, she said quietly. Don't tell him that. He'll never stop. She laughed, small and real. The same laugh he'd first heard in her texts 3 weeks ago when she'd typed just ha. They hung up at 5:07. By 5:30, the story had been picked up by 2 national outlets. By 6, Daniel's name was spelled correctly in all of them. He made Marcus dinner. Spaghetti because it was fast and because Marcus had strong feelings about spaghetti that were entirely positive. They ate at the kitchen table, and Marcus talked about the field trip form he needed signed, and about a kid in his class named Dion who could solve a Rubik's Cube in under 2 minutes, which Marcus considered one of the most impressive things he'd ever witnessed in his 8 years on Earth. Daniel signed the field trip form and agreed that 2 minutes was genuinely impressive, and ate his spaghetti, and kept his face clear and even. After dinner, after Marcus was bathed and in bed, after the triple-knotted sneakers were lined up by the door for morning, Daniel sat back down at the table with his phone and made himself read the articles. All of them. The first one was of the careful kind, the kind of writing that implies without stating, that frames without accusing, that leaves just enough space for the reader to fill in with whatever they already believed. It used phrases like sources close to the situation, and questions about professional boundaries, and a relationship that began, according to insiders, with a misdirected photograph. It quoted Richard Coles, though not by name, as an executive who had observed a change in Olivia's focus in recent weeks. It described Daniel as a warehouse employee and single father to a child with developmental needs, and it used that last detail with a precision that made him understand exactly what it was meant to do to make him look like someone who needed saving, which made Olivia look like someone who'd overstepped. His hands were steady. He was proud of that. The second article was worse. It had the screenshots. Mimbe. They'd pulled 4 messages from what must have been Coles's accessed copy, and they'd arranged them out of order, taken from different nights, different contexts, stripped of everything around them, and laid them next to each other, so they read like a progression they were never meant to be. His message about Marcus and the shoes was there, placed after a line of Olivia's that had originally come 3 conversations earlier, so it looked like she'd prompted it, rather than simply listened when it came. Sandra's name appeared once. In a sentence Daniel had written at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, when the grief had been sitting heavier than usual, and he'd typed it without thinking about anything except that it was true. Seeing it in a news article was a specific kind of violation he didn't have a word for. Like someone had gone into a room he kept locked and left the door open on their way out. He put the phone down. He sat with his eyes closed for 60 seconds, breathing through his nose. Then he picked the phone back up and texted Olivia. They used Sandra's name. Her response came in under 30 seconds. I know, I just saw. Daniel, Don't apologize again, he typed. It doesn't change it. What do you need? He thought about it honestly. I need tomorrow to happen. I need you to walk into that room and say what you're going to say, because right now, the only thing keeping me from being completely furious is knowing that someone is about to tell the truth about what this actually was. A pause. Then that's what I'm going to do, she said. At 7:45 p.m., his phone lit up with a notification he hadn't expected. A tweet he didn't use the platform much, but he had an old account mostly dormant had been tagged in something. He clicked through. Damshiro. A woman named Tanya Reeves, who had 80,000 followers and who identified in her bio as a Chicago-based community organizer, had posted, "The real story here isn't about a CEO's judgment. It's about what happens when a black, single father's private grief gets turned into a prop in a corporate power play. Name your target correctly. This man isn't a scandal. He's a person. Find the people who leaked his conversations and ask what they were protecting." It had 6,000 retweets in 40 minutes. Daniel stared at it. He didn't know Tanya Reeves. He'd never heard of her. But she'd read the same articles he had and arrived at the same place he had the same understanding of what the framing was actually designed to do. And she'd said it out loud in a way he hadn't been able to because she had 80,000 people listening and he had Jerome and his mother. He screenshot it and sent it to Olivia without comment. She responded, "Good, let that breathe." He almost smiled. By 9 p.m., the comment sections had split. He knew better than to read comment sections. He read them anyway, standing in his kitchen with his phone too close to his face, scrolling through the wreckage of strangers making decisions about his life based on 4 paragraphs and 3 screenshots. Half of them had made up their minds that Olivia had manipulated a grieving man for sport. The other half had decided Daniel was after her money. Both camps were loud and certain and completely wrong, and there was nothing he could do about any of it. He put his phone in his bedroom face down and went and sat on the couch without it. He watched television for 20 minutes without knowing what he was watching. Then he went to bed. He didn't sleep. At 6:15 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "I'm going in. Wish me luck." He typed back, "You don't need luck. You know what's true. Sometimes I need someone to remind me." "I know," he said. "Me too." He got Marcus ready for school. He did it the same as always, eggs backpack check, glasses, straight shoes with the triple knot. He drove the same route. He dropped Marcus at the same door where Mrs. Patterson stood like a sentinel. and she gave Daniel a single professional nod that communicated more than a paragraph could have. He drove home. He sat at the table. He waited. At 8:47 a.m., Olivia called him. Her voice when he answered was the voice of someone who had just walked out of a fire and was still checking whether they were burned. "Tell me," he said. It went. She stopped, breathed. It went nothing like I planned. His grip on the phone tightened. What happened? I walked in, and before I could say anything, the board chair, a man named Gerald Hoyt, who has been in that chair for 9 years, and who has never once, in 9 years, looked at me like I was a full person. He opened the meeting by putting a resignation letter on the table in front of me. A pause. Pre-signed, with my name already typed. He said the board was prepared to accept it immediately if I signed, or they'd take a formal vote to remove me for conduct unbecoming of executive leadership. The kitchen went very quiet. "They tried to fire you," Daniel said. "They tried to make me fire myself," she corrected. "Which is different. Cleaner for them. No wrongful termination exposure, no public vote, just a CEO who voluntarily stepped down due to personal reasons." Her voice was precise and controlled in the way of someone who'd been holding something back for a long time. Hoyt said, and these are his exact words, that the board had a responsibility to protect the company from the personal entanglements of its leadership. "Personal entanglements," Daniel repeated. A black warehouse worker calling a CEO at midnight. Hoyt had apparently said, though Olivia's version of it was clipped and careful. He didn't say it like that. He said it much more politely. But that's what he meant. Daniel was quiet. "What did you say?" he asked. What she said next. What she told Daniel she'd said, standing at the head of that boardroom table, with Gerald Hoyt's pre-signed resignation letter in front of her, and 11 faces arranged around the room like a jury, was the thing that would be repeated later. In articles that were more careful than the first ones. In the Tanya Reeves follow-up post that would get 140,000 shares. In conversations between people who'd never met Olivia Bennett, and never would, but who recognized something in what she'd done. She'd pushed the resignation letter back across the table. And she'd talked for 14 minutes without stopping. She told them about burnout, not in the careful, managed way of a CEO who's read all the right leadership books, in the real way. She told them that for 3 years she had been running on empty in a way that had nothing to do with her performance metrics and everything to do with the fact that she had built a life that was enormously successful and completely empty at its center, and that she had become so practiced at performing strength that she'd forgotten she was performing it. She told them about the photograph, about the wrong number, about a conversation with a man she'd never met that had given her for the first time in longer than she could calculate the experience of being seen as a person rather than a position. She did not apologize for it. She did not frame it as a mistake or a lapse in judgment. She said, "This is what happened, and this is what it meant, and if you want to use it to remove me, that is your right. But you should know exactly what you're doing when you do it." Mommy. She told them about Richard Coles, about the access logs, about the 14 months of documentation her legal team had assembled in 18 hours, showing a coordinated effort by Coles to undermine her leadership through information-gathering strategic leaks and the deliberate weaponization of a private citizen's grief. She put that document on the table too. Hoyt didn't move for about 30 seconds. She told Daniel. He just looked at the document. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the other board members. And the room changed. I could feel it. It was like something tipped. "What tipped?" he asked. "That 2 of them, a woman named Sandra Park and a man named Thomas Ewing, who's been on the board for 3 years, they started asking questions. Not about me. About Coles. About what the access log showed. About what the legal exposure was for the company if any of this went further." She paused. They stopped looking at me like a problem and started looking at Coles like one. He exhaled slowly. "So they believed you. Some of them, not all of them." A beat. Hoyt still wants me gone. He made that clear when we broke for recess. He cornered me in the hallway and told me I'd made a strategic error by bringing my personal life into a professional setting. A pause. I told him that the only strategic error in that room was made 14 months ago by a man he'd trusted more than he should have. What did he say to that? Nothing. He walked away. She was quiet for a moment. The vote isn't until this afternoon. Daniel let the weight of that settle. Are you scared? He asked. A long pause. Longer than usual. Yes, she said. Not quickly, not defensively. Just yes, flat and honest. Good, he said. Good. It means it matters, he said. If you weren't scared, you'd be a different kind of person. Another pause. Then, how do you do that? Do what? Say the thing that makes it less, not smaller, just less heavy. He thought about it, about all the 3 a.m. nights, about Sandra, about Marcus's shoe, about the specific practice of surviving, which is mostly just the practice of finding the sentence that's true enough to lean on for another few hours. I've had a lot of practice, he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. I have to go back in soon. Okay. Daniel. She stopped. Yeah, whatever they decide in there, I need you to know that I don't regret it. Any of it. She paused. The wrong number. The conversation. All of it. He looked at Sandra's photograph. Me neither, he said. She hung up. He sat at the table. He didn't check his phone. He didn't turn on the television. He just sat in the quiet of his kitchen, the loud quiet, the 3 a.m. kind, even though it was 10 in the morning, and waited. At 1:14 p.m. she called back. He answered on the first ring. Her voice was different, still stripped, still tired, but something in it had shifted. The way a room shifts when someone finally opens a window. 6 to 5, she said. He waited. I kept my chair, she said. 6 to 5. He closed his eyes. Coles is being escorted out of the building right now. Formal termination for breach of confidentiality agreements and misuse of company resources. Legal will handle the rest. A breath. Hoyt abstained, which was his coward's way of not going on record either way. But 6 voted to retain, and that's the number that matters. 6 to 5, Daniel said. It's not a landslide, she said. No, he agreed. But it's enough. She laughed, a real one this time, not small, the kind that comes up from somewhere unexpected and surprises the person laughing. He felt something in his own chest loosen. Just slightly. Just enough. I have 17 missed calls, she said. My general counsel is standing outside my office door. In about 10 minutes I'm going to have to become CEO again. A pause. But I needed to call you first. I know, he said. Thank you, she said. For I don't know, for not running. He thought about that morning 3 weeks ago, the 3 a.m. kitchen, the bad coffee, the accidental photograph, the 4 words he'd typed without thinking. For whatever combination of exhaustion and instinct and basic human longing had made him type, yes, it is, instead of wrong number, sorry. I thought about it, he admitted. I know, she said. But you didn't. No, he said. I didn't. A pause, brief and full. I'll call you tonight, she said. Yeah, he said. I'll be at the table. She knew exactly which table he meant. She hung up. He put the phone down on the table and pressed his palms flat against the surface. The same gesture he'd made a month ago when the weight of everything had been crushing and the night had felt bottomless, and the most he could say for himself was that he was still sitting upright. He was still sitting upright. Right. But something was different now. Something that didn't have a clean name yet. Not hope exactly. Not safety. The world outside was still loud. The articles were still out there. His name was still spelled correctly in all of them. But something had held. He thought about what he'd told Marcus the day before. It's complicated, but we're going to be okay. He'd been trying to believe it when he said it. He'd been sitting at the table now with the quiet of the apartment around him and the winter light coming through the kitchen window and the photograph of Sandra watching from the shelf. He thought that maybe not, certainly not yet, but maybe it was true. At 3:48 p.m., Tanya Reeves posted again. Update. I'm hearing the board voted to retain Bennett 6-5, and Richard Coles, the VP who leaked a grieving man's private conversations to kill a woman's career, has been terminated for cause. Accountability isn't perfect, but today it showed up. That's worth noting. The post got 200,000 shares by midnight. Daniel didn't see that number until the next morning. Daniel didn't see that number. He was busy picking Marcus up from school, signing a permission slip for a class project, and having a very long, serious conversation about whether Saturn's rings were actually solid or made of smaller particles, which Marcus had decided was the most important open question in modern science. Daniel told him he thought Marcus was right. Marcus accepted this with the dignity of a person who had never doubted it. They drove home in the ordinary dark of an ordinary evening, and the storm, though not gone, had moved to somewhere further away. And for the first time in longer than Daniel could calculate, the silence on the drive home was not the loud kind. It was just quiet. The real kind. The quiet didn't last. It never does. Daniel knew that. He'd learned it the hard way, that peace isn't a destination you arrive at and stay. It's something you get in small amounts in spaces between the hard things, and you hold it carefully, and you don't squeeze too tight, because the moment you start trying to keep it is the moment it starts leaving. 3 days after the board vote, the quiet broke. It broke at 7:22 in the morning while Daniel was making eggs, and Marcus was in the bathroom and the television in the living room was running the local news on low volume the way it always did in the morning. Background noise, nothing more. Then he heard his name. Not his full name, just Brooks, a warehouse worker named Brooks, but it was enough. He crossed to the living room in 4 steps and turned the volume up. A morning news anchor. A woman with a smooth professional delivery that made everything sound equally important was reading from a segment called The Human Side of the Bennett Story. And the human side, apparently, was him. There was no photograph someone had made that decision at least, but there was a description precise enough that anyone who knew him would know immediately, and a quote attributed to a neighbor of his unnamed, who had said that Daniel Brooks was a quiet man who kept to himself and seemed to be a good father. He stood in his living room and listened to a stranger describe his life in 45 seconds. Marcus came out of the bathroom with his glasses on sideways. He looked at the television. He looked at his father's face. He was 8 years old, but he was not a child who missed things. "Dad," he said. "Glasses," Daniel said without turning around. Marcus straightened them. "Is that about you?" Daniel turned the television off. "Go eat your eggs," he said. "They're getting cold." Marcus went to the kitchen. Daniel stood in the living room for a moment with the remote still in his hand, looking at the blank screen. Then he went and ate breakfast with his son and did not check his phone once until Marcus was out the door. When he finally looked, there were 22 messages. Most were from numbers he didn't recognize. 4 were from people he knew: Jerome again, his cousin Darnell from Atlanta, who he hadn't spoken to in 8 months, his neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, from the 2nd floor, who had slipped a handwritten note under his door that simply read, "Praying for you and that baby," and one from his mother that said nothing except, "Call me when he's at school." He called her. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been sitting with the phone in her hand. "I saw the news," she said. "I figured." "Daniel." Her voice did the thing it did when she was choosing words carefully the way she'd done when he was 17, and she was about to say something she knew he didn't want to hear but needed to. How long has this been going on? About a month. Silence. A month, she repeated. It's not what they're making it sound like. I know that, she said, and the quickness of it surprised him. I know you, Daniel. I'm not asking what it is. I'm asking how you're carrying it. He sat down on the couch. Outside, a car drove past. Ordinary city sounds, completely indifferent to his life. I'm carrying it, he said. That's not an answer. Ma. He paused. Olivia is. He stopped. Found the sentence. She's the first person I've talked to in 2 years who didn't treat me like I was either a tragedy or a task. That's all. That's the whole truth of it. His mother was quiet for a long time. Your father was like that, she said finally. The way he listened. Like whatever you said was the only thing happening in the world. A pause. You haven't had that in a while. No, he said. I haven't. Ciao. Okay, she said, not dismissive, just okay. I understand I'm putting it in the place where I keep the things that matter. What do you need from me? Nothing right now. Just don't worry too much. That's not available, she said flatly. I'm your mother. Try again. He almost smiled. Just be there when I call. That one I can do, she said. I love you. Love you too, Ma. You. Bembasi. He hung up and sat for another minute, then stood, grabbed his keys, and drove to work, because the Bills didn't care about news cycles, and the warehouse didn't care about board votes, and the only way he knew how to move through hard things was to keep moving. Sal met him at the locker room with a look that communicated several things at once without saying any of them. He handed Daniel a different assignment than usual indoor inventory away from the loading dock, where the parking lot was visible away from the front entrance, where a second journalist had apparently appeared that morning before being asked to leave the property. Appreciate it, Daniel said. Sal shrugged. Just scheduling. Neither of them said anything else about it. Jerome found him in the third aisle at 9:30. You see the segment this morning? Yeah. The neighbor quote, Jerome said. Yeah. That was Mrs. Henderson from 4B, Jerome said with certainty. She talks to everyone. I know. Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then, you doing okay? Working on it. Jerome nodded once. Good enough. He picked up a clipboard and walked on. That was the thing about Jerome. He never required you to be more than you actually were. At 11:04, Olivia texted, I'm doing a press statement this afternoon. Formal written release through the company. My legal team drafted it. I've been fighting with them about it for 2 hours. What are you fighting about? He typed back. They want to say our conversations were purely casual and non-romantic in nature. They want to use the word innocuous. He read that word twice. Innocuous. Like what they'd talked about Sandra Marcus' burnout survival. The specific exhaustion of loving someone gone and still getting up anyway was harmless background noise. Something that required no defending because it meant nothing. That bother you? He typed. It makes me want to put my fist through the draft, she said. Yes, it bothers me. What did you tell them? I told them I wasn't going to describe something real as nothing. That if I started doing that, I might as well have signed the resignation letter. A pause. My lawyer said I was being emotional. I told him I was being accurate, and those are different things. He put his phone in his pocket and worked for 20 minutes before he had an answer to what he wanted to say. Then he typed, What does the statement say now? It says that I entered into an unexpected personal connection with a private citizen during a difficult period, that the nature of that connection has been misrepresented, and that I stand by both the connection and my leadership record without qualification. A beat. It's still legal language, but it doesn't call it nothing. That's good, he said. Is it enough? He thought about it honestly. It's honest. That's more than enough. She released the statement at 2 p.m. By 3 p.m., Tanya Reeves had quote tweeted it with 3 words. She didn't flinch. By 4 p.m., something unexpected happened. Daniel was back home at the table when his phone buzzed with a notification from an account he'd forgotten he had. Someone had found his dormant social media profile barely 3 posts, the last one from 4 years ago, a photo of Marcus at a birthday party, and tagged him in something. He clicked through, reluctantly braced. It wasn't what he expected. A man named Robert Calloway, 63 years old based on his profile, a retired postal worker from Detroit, had written a post that read, "I've been following the Bennett story and I want to say something about Daniel Brooks. I don't know this man, but I know what it looks like to be a black man raising a child alone after loss. And I know what it looks like when the world decides your grief is a prop in somebody else's story. Leave this man alone." He talked to someone who listened. That's not a scandal, that's a miracle. It had been reposted 14,000 times. Daniel read it twice. Then he put his phone down on the table and pressed his hands flat on the surface the way he always did when he needed to hold something steady. His eyes were not entirely dry. He didn't try particularly hard to fix that. He thought about the 63-year-old man from Detroit who'd looked at a news article and seen him. Really seen him. Not the story, not the scandal. Him. He thought about what Olivia had said in the very beginning. About being seen. He picked his phone back up and saved the post without reposting it. It was enough to know it existed. That evening, Olivia called at 7:15, later than usual. Her voice was tired in a different way than he'd heard before, not the corporate exhaustion he'd learned to recognize, the running on empty CEO kind, but something quieter, something that lived closer to the surface. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer is hard." "Okay." "Are you angry at me? Still under everything, under the we're handling it, and the statements and the calls? Are you actually angry?" He let the question sit for a moment. He'd asked himself the same thing alone in the quiet of his car the week before, pressing on the bruise to find where the pain actually lived. "I was," he said, "when they used Sandra's name, when I realized the conversations had been accessed without either of us knowing. I was angry, and I didn't have anywhere to put it." "I know," she said. "And now?" "Now I'm—" He found the right word slowly. "Tired. Not of you, just of the whole machine of it. The way something private becomes public property the moment it involves someone with your profile. The way everyone gets to have an opinion about something they weren't part of. That's not going to stop," she said. "I know. It might get louder before it gets quieter." "I know that too." "Daniel," she paused. "I want to say something, and I don't know how to say it without it sounding like I'm making a speech." "Then don't make a speech," he said. "Just say it." And a breath. "Then, what we built, the conversations, the honesty, whatever it is, I don't want it to be something that gets consumed by all of this. I don't want this to be the story, the scandal story, the board story, the news segment story." Her voice was very quiet now. "I want it to still be ours." He was quiet for a long moment. "It is ours," he said finally. "Nobody printed the part that matters." "What part is that?" He thought about 3 a.m. and bad coffee, and the wrong number, and the accidental photograph, and a woman who'd wanted proof she still laughed, and a man who'd needed just once to say something true to someone who wasn't already holding his grief for him. The part where it was just 2 people, he said. Being honest in the dark. Nobody printed that. They printed around it, but they didn't get to the center of it. She didn't say anything for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had the texture of someone who'd been holding something back and just let it down. "Thank you," she said. "You keep thanking me," he said. "You keep earning it." He shook his head, but didn't tell her to stop. They talked for another 40 minutes. About the week ahead, she had 3 investor calls. She was dreading a conversation with the 2 board members who'd voted against her that her counsel said was necessary for stability, and a company-wide meeting she needed to lead on Friday that everyone would be watching for signs of whether she was actually okay. He had Marcus's specialist appointment, a shift change at the warehouse he needed to negotiate, and a conversation with his mother that he'd been putting off because she wanted to drive up from Joliet, and he wasn't sure he was ready to have her in his apartment seeing all of it up close. None of it was extraordinary. All of it was real. At some point, he realized they'd stopped talking about the storm entirely and had started just talking the way they always had in the beginning. About Marcus and whether the specialist was going to recommend the new communication therapy program. About whether Olivia's Friday meeting should be seated or standing, which was apparently a thing that mattered in boardrooms for reasons Daniel found somewhat absurd. About a book he'd been meaning to read for 2 years that sat on his nightstand like an accusation. She recommended one he'd never heard of. He wrote the title on the inside of an old bill envelope because it was the only paper nearby. "What are you doing tomorrow?" she asked at some point near 9. "Work, pickup, dinner." A pause. "The usual." "The usual," she repeated, not mocking, almost like she was trying on the phrase, testing how it felt. "You, 6:30 a.m. call with an investor in London," she said. 3 hours of internal meetings, a lunch I've already dreaded for 2 weeks. A pause. "Also the usual." "Different usual," he said. "Very different," she agreed. "But still..." She stopped. "Still what?" "Still something I'm showing up for," she said. "That's different than it was a month ago." He understood that. He understood it in the specific way of someone who'd spent a long time showing up for reasons that lived outside himself for Marcus, for the bills for Sandra's memory, and had only recently begun to feel even a small corner of something that might be for himself. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." At 9:47, she said she needed to sleep. He agreed. They stayed on the phone for another 6 minutes without saying much, the comfortable silence they'd gotten good at before she finally said goodnight. He sat at the table after. The apartment was quiet, Marcus asleep, the city muffled outside, the photograph of Sandra on the shelf. He looked at it for a long time. He didn't talk to Sandra in his head the way he used to in the months right after she died. He'd done it constantly, then narrated his day, asked her things, answered for her the way he thought she would have answered. His grief counselor had said it was normal. His mother had said it was love, looking for somewhere to land. He didn't do it as much now. The need had changed shape. But tonight he looked at the photograph and thought not in the form of words exactly, but in the form of something below words. "I'm okay. I'm figuring something out. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm still here." Sandra's smile in the photograph didn't change, but it felt somehow like enough. He was reaching to turn off the kitchen light when his phone buzzed one more time. Pumai. A number he didn't know. Not a journalist format, no area code he recognized. Just a number and a message that read, "Mr. Brooks, my name is Carol Sims. I'm a producer with the Whitmore Group. We'd like to discuss a paid interview opportunity regarding your experiences over the past weeks. Compensation would be significant. Please reach out at your earliest." He deleted it before he finished reading. Then he turned the light off and went to bed. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling. The fan was running low and steady. Through the wall, he could hear Marcus breathing in his sleep, or maybe he was imagining it. Maybe he just knew his son's rhythms well enough that he could reconstruct them without hearing them. His mind went to the board meeting. To 6 to 5. To Olivia, pushing a resignation letter back across a table and talking for 14 minutes without stopping. To Tanya Reeves and the Post that got 200,000 shares and Robert Calloway from Detroit, who'd seen him clearly from 600 miles away. He thought about all the ways the last month had tried to shrink him, to make him the prop in someone else's story. The grieving man, the warehouse worker, the scandalous variable in a CEO's professional crisis. He thought about how none of those things were wrong exactly. He was grieving. He did work in a warehouse, and his existence had become briefly a variable in a crisis he hadn't created. But none of those things were the whole truth either. The whole truth was a 3 a.m. kitchen and a wrong number and 4 words typed without thinking. The whole truth was a woman who'd asked if something was beautiful and a man who'd looked closely enough to say yes and mean it and not regret it. The whole truth was still theirs. He slept. At 6:18 in the morning, before his alarm, before Marcus, before the coffee and the bills and the day's machinery, his phone lit up with a text from Olivia. It was a photograph. Her kitchen. The same kitchen as the first one a month ago. The same counter, but different. The window behind her was light now. Early morning light, not the dark of midnight. And she wasn't smiling the caught-off-guard smile of the first photo. She was just standing there, coffee in hand, looking directly at the camera. Tired. Real. Completely herself. No message beneath it. No question. He understood immediately that it wasn't a question this time. It wasn't, "Is it beautiful?" It was something else. Something that didn't need words. He typed back one line. Still, yes. He put the phone on the nightstand. And then Marcus appeared in the doorway. Glasses, crooked, one sock on, carrying his shoes with their triple knotted laces, and the specific determination of a child who had decided the morning had officially started. "Dad, I need help." "I'm here," Daniel said. He sat up. He put his feet on the floor. And the day, ordinary, difficult, real theirs, began again. The morning Marcus asked about the lady on the news, Daniel was washing dishes. What? He heard the question clearly. He set the plate down carefully. He turned off the faucet. Then he turned around and looked at his son, who was sitting at the kitchen table, with his cereal spoon halfway to his mouth, watching his father with the particular attention he reserved for things he'd been thinking about for a while, and had finally decided to say out loud. "What lady?" Daniel said, not stalling, just making sure. "The one they kept talking about at school," Marcus said. "Dion said his mom said you know her. The CEO lady." He said the word CEO carefully, like a word he'd looked up. "Is that true?" Daniel pulled out the chair across from his son and sat down. He looked at Marcus, at the glasses slightly smudged at the corner, at the way his hands were wrapped around his cereal bowl, like he was steadying himself, at the 8-year-old face that had Sandra's eyes and Daniel's jaw and its own entirely original expression of cautious seriousness. "Yeah," Daniel said. "I know her." Marcus processed this. "How?" "She sent me a message by accident, wrong number, and we talked." Marcus thought about this. Like how me and Grandma talk. Something like that. "Is she nice?" Daniel looked at his son for a moment. At the question, which was so clean and direct and absent of everything the adults in this story had complicated it with. "Yeah," he said. "She's very nice." Marcus nodded, satisfied in the way he was satisfied with things that made internal sense to him. He went back to his cereal. Then, without looking up, "Are you friends?" Daniel thought about every word that had passed between him and Olivia in the last month. About 3 a.m. and wrong numbers and board meetings and Sandra's name in a newspaper and a photograph sent twice for completely different reasons. "Yeah," he said. "We're friends." "Okay," Marcus said. And that was the end of it for him, because Marcus, unlike most of the world, didn't need a thing to be more complicated than it actually was. Daniel went back to the dishes. His hands were not quite steady. That was the morning of the day everything moved again. At 9:17 a.m. Olivia texted, "I need to tell you something. Can you talk?" He was on break at the warehouse. He called her immediately. She answered on the second ring. "I got a call this morning," she said, "from a journalist. Not the kind we've been dealing with. a long-form writer. Her name is Dana Morse. She writes for a national magazine, and she wants to do a piece, not a gossip piece, not a scandal piece about burnout and leadership, and what happens when executives stop performing and start being honest. He leaned against the outside wall of the building. She wants to use you. She wants to use both of us, Olivia said. She was very clear about that. She said the story isn't about a CEO and a wrong number. It's about two people who were both quietly drowning and found something to hold on to, and what that cost them and what it meant. Daniel said nothing for a moment. "What did you tell her?" he asked. "I told her I had to ask you first." A pause, which apparently surprised her. She said most executives don't ask permission for things like that. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I want to do it," she said, carefully, honestly. "Not because it's good for my image, not because my communications team thinks it reframes the narrative, though they do, and they won't stop saying so. I want to do it because the story they told about us was wrong, and someone is offering to tell it right, and I think we've both spent enough time letting other people tell our story badly." He thought about Robert Calloway from Detroit, about Mrs. Patterson saying understood in her flat professional voice, about Tanya Reeves posting she didn't flinch, about all the strangers who'd looked at the wrong version of this story and somehow still found their way to a true feeling about it. "Will they talk to Marcus?" he asked. "I already told her Marcus is not part of it," Olivia said firmly. She agreed without pushing back, which is how I knew she was the real thing. He exhaled. "Okay. Okay, yes. Okay, yes," he said. She made a sound that was part exhale, part something more. "Thank you." "You keep saying that. You keep making it necessary." He went back inside. He worked the rest of his shift with a kind of focused calm that Jerome noticed and commented on with a single raised eyebrow that Daniel answered with a shrug that communicated later. At 4 p.m. his phone buzzed with a number he recognized now, Dana Morse, who'd apparently gotten his number from Olivia. The text was brief and professional. "Mr. Brooks, I appreciate your willingness to speak. I want you to know I'm going to tell this the way it actually happened. That's the only story I'm interested in." He typed back, "That's all I'm asking." She replied, "That's all anyone should have to ask. Let's talk Thursday." He put the phone in his pocket and drove to get Marcus. Thursday came. Dana Morse was not what he'd expected. She was 61 years old, which he hadn't anticipated, with the kind of face that had listened to a great many things without flinching, and she'd done the interview at his kitchen table, which had been her suggestion. She'd said she wanted to be where the actual story was, not in a conference room. She'd brought her own coffee. She'd asked him to start wherever felt right. She'd spent 2 hours asking him things that no one else had thought to ask, not about Olivia's board meeting, not about Richard Coles, not about the news coverage. She'd asked him about Sandra, about the 3 a.m. feeling, about what it was like to be the kind of strong that nobody checks on, about what Marcus had said at the breakfast table about Saturn's rings on the morning everything went public, because Daniel had mentioned it offhand, and she'd stopped and asked him to tell her the whole thing. He'd told her the whole thing. When she left, she shook his hand at the door and said, "You're not what the coverage made you." "I know," he said. "I'm going to make sure some other people know too," she said. He believed her. Nay. The interview with Olivia. Dana told them both later had taken 4 hours. Olivia had cried once, not during the board meeting section, not during the part about Coles and the leaks, but during the part where Dana had asked her to describe the first conversation she'd had with Daniel. What had it felt like Dana had asked to be heard by someone who had absolutely no reason to listen? Olivia had stopped talking for almost a full minute. Then she'd said, "Like being a person again. That's the only way I can describe it. Like I'd been a role for so long that I'd forgotten there was a person underneath it. And he, without trying, without knowing me, without any agenda, he just talked to me like I was a person." Daniel heard this secondhand from Olivia on a Tuesday night phone call 2 weeks after the interviews. He didn't say anything when she told him. He didn't have to. The piece published on a Thursday morning 6 weeks after the wrong number, 3 weeks after the board vote, 2 weeks after Dana Morse sat at his kitchen table and drank her own coffee and listened like she meant it. It was called The 3 a.m. Call, What Two Strangers Found When They Stopped Pretending to Be Fine. It ran 4,000 words. It had no photographs of Daniel, his request honored without question. It had a photograph of Olivia that she'd chosen herself, not a conference headshot, not a Forbes cover. A photo taken in her kitchen. She was leaning against the counter. No blazer, just a white t-shirt and dark jeans and a half smile that reached her eyes. Daniel recognized it immediately. It was a different photo from the first one, but it was the same woman, the same moment of not performing. He read the piece at the kitchen table alone before Marcus was awake. He read it straight through without stopping. Dana had gotten it right. All of it. The 3 a.m. feeling. The specific loneliness of surviving. The way something accidental had become something necessary. She'd written about Sandra with a gentleness that made his throat tighten. She'd written about Marcus and the shoes in a single sentence that was so exactly right, he had to read it twice. His son had spent 6 weeks learning to tie his shoes, and when he finally did it alone, he cried the release. Kind of crying, his father said, like he'd been holding something heavy and finally got to put it down. Daniel Brooks knows that kind of crying. He's been doing it in private for 2 years. He put the phone down. He sat with the piece for a moment, the way you sit with something that's been said about you that is exactly true, which is its own particular experience, not comfortable, not uncomfortable, just the sensation of being accurately known. Then Marcus appeared in the doorway. Glasses on already, which was unusual, shoes in hand. "Dad, can you help me practice the knot?" Daniel looked at his son. He pulled out the chair next to him. "Come here," he said. Marcus sat down and handed him one shoe with the gravity of a person undertaking something serious. Daniel held it. He walked Marcus through it one more time, loop around, through pull, the way he'd done 30 or 40 times over the past weeks, patient and steady. And Marcus followed each step with his tongue between his teeth and his full concentration, and when the knot tightened and held, Marcus looked up with an expression that was so purely himself, proud and startled, and already planning to do it again, that Daniel had to look away for a second toward the window. "Good," he said. "Do the other one." Marcus did the other one. It held. The piece had 11,000 shares by noon. By evening, Tanya Reeves had posted, "Read this. This is the story. This was always the story." And then in a second post, "Also shout out to Dana Morse for remembering that journalism is supposed to find the truth, not build the most clicks out of someone's worst week." By the next morning, Daniel's phone had messages from people he'd never heard of, from cities he'd never been to, and almost all of them said some version of the same thing. That they recognized the 3 a.m. feeling. That they knew what it was to survive in a way nobody asked you about. That they knew what it was to be seen, and more importantly, what it was to go without being seen for so long, you stopped expecting it. He didn't respond to any of them, but he read them, all of them, standing in his kitchen at 6 in the morning with his coffee reading. Strangers say true things in the small specific language of people who had also been in the dark for a while. He thought about what it meant to be seen. He'd been thinking about it since the beginning, since Olivia had first said something close to it on one of their first late nights. It was, he'd thought then, a simple thing. A small thing. He understood now that it was not a small thing. That it was in many ways the whole thing. At 11:23 a.m. his phone rang. "Olivia." He answered. "Have you been reading?" she said. "Some of it." "It's..." She paused. "It's a lot." "Yeah." "How are you?" she asked. Not the polite kind, the real kind. He thought about it the way she'd taught him to, by actually thinking about it, not reaching for the ready-made answer. "I'm okay," he said. Actually, okay. Not fine. Okay. That's different, she said. Yeah, he said. I know. A pause. Then she said, Can I ask you something I've been thinking about for a while? Ask. What happens now, she said. For you. Not the story. Not the coverage. What happens for Daniel Brooks now? He was quiet for a moment, looking at the table at the spot where Marcus had tied his shoe at the chair his mother had sat in when she'd finally driven up from Joliet the previous weekend, and sat across from him and held his hand across the table the way she hadn't done since he was a child, and said nothing at all for almost a full minute, which was more useful than anything she could have said. I keep going, he said finally. Marcus has his appointment next week and I've got a shift change to sort, and there's a field trip form I haven't mailed yet. He paused. The same things. The same things, she repeated. But different, he said. A little. I don't know how to explain it. Like the same road, but you can see further down it than you could before. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing the ambient quiet of wherever she was. Her office probably, or maybe not. Maybe somewhere less official. Maybe she was standing at that kitchen window with the city below her, the way she'd described on their first night. I feel that, she said quietly. The same road, but different. Yeah, Daniel. She said his name the way she always said it, like it was the whole sentence. I'm glad I sent that photo to the wrong number. He smiled, a real one, the kind that surprised him, which were the best kind. Me too, he said. Even with all of it. Even with all of it, he said. A silence. The good kind. The kind that didn't need anything added to it. I'm going to be in your part of the city on Friday, she said. I have a site visit near the south side. Late afternoon. A pause. I wasn't going to say anything. I don't want to. I don't know. I don't want to make this something it isn't, or make it something neither of us is ready for. He understood what she was saying, and he understood what she wasn't saying. And he sat with both things for a moment, in the honest, unhurried way they'd always sat with things, without rushing to fill the space. Marcus gets out at 3:15, he said. I know. He's been wanting to go to the place on Wentworth that does the fish fry on Fridays, he said. He talks about it every week. A pause. Small. Then, is that an invitation? Oh, he thought about it. About what it meant. About all the ways it could be complicated, and all the ways it could be simple, and which version of those two things was more true. It's just dinner, he said. Yeah, she said, quietly. It's just dinner. Bring your own appetite, he said. Marcus orders for everyone, and he always gets too much. She laughed. The real kind. The not small kind. The kind he'd first heard in a text that just said ha, and had known even then was the real thing underneath everything. I'll be there, she said. He hung up. He sat at the table. He looked at Sandra's photograph on the shelf, at the smile that didn't change, at the directness of it, the way she always looked straight at the camera, straight at whatever was in front of her, without looking sideways, without hedging. And he thought, I'm still here. I'm still figuring it out. I don't know what Friday becomes or what the road looks like past the part I can currently see. I don't know what Olivia is or what she will be. I don't know what any of it is yet. But I know what it isn't. It isn't nothing. He stood up. He got Marcus's field trip form from the counter. He found a stamp in the kitchen drawer. He addressed the envelope and left it by the door to mail on the way out. Then he washed his coffee cup, put it back in the cabinet, picked up his keys, and went about the business of his day, ordinary difficult real moving forward, the same road with a longer view. On Friday at 3:16 p.m., Marcus came through the school door and stopped when he saw the woman standing next to his father on the sidewalk. He looked at her. He looked at his father. He looked back at her with the unself-conscious directness of a child who had not yet learned to pretend he wasn't looking. Are you the CEO lady? He said. Olivia looked at Daniel once quick with something in her eyes that was half startled and half lit up. Then she looked at Marcus and said, "Yeah, I'm the CEO lady." Marcus considered this with his full attention. Then, "My dad said you're nice." "I'm trying to be," she said. Marcus nodded, accepting this as a reasonable answer. He turned to Daniel. "Can we get the fish fry?" "That's where we're going," Daniel said. "Okay." Marcus looked at Olivia again. "Do you like fish?" "I do," she said. "Good," he said with the satisfaction of someone whose logistics had just aligned. He reached up and took Daniel's hand and started walking, pulling him forward the way he always did, with the full confidence of a child who had decided the direction and expected the world to follow. Daniel followed. Olivia fell into step beside him. Not holding hands, not performing anything, just two people walking on a South Side Chicago sidewalk in the late afternoon, following an 8-year-old who knew where he was going and saw no reason to slow down. The city moved around them, traffic and voices and the ordinary percussion of a Friday afternoon. Completely indifferent, as cities always are, to the particular weight of what any two people are carrying. But they were walking. That was the thing. They were walking. And a month ago, in the specific dark of 3 a.m., with bad coffee and an unanswered photograph, and the loud kind of quiet, neither of them had known they'd still be standing. Neither of them had known there was still a direction to move in. Neither of them had known that a wrong number and 4 honest words could become something worth walking toward. Now they knew. Marcus stopped at the corner and looked back to make sure they were still with him. He readjusted his glasses, which had gone sideways. He checked the lace on his left shoe, still knotted, still holding, and then he looked up at both of them with the expression of someone who had assessed the situation and found it satisfactory. "Come on," he said. And they did. They were not saved. They were not fixed. They were not a story with a clean ending or a lesson wrapped in ribbon. They were two people who had been quietly falling apart and had accidentally, improbably in the dark, found someone willing to be honest at the same time. That was all. That was everything. The late-night photograph had asked one question, and the answer, the real answer, the one that had nothing to do with how anyone looked, and everything to do with what it meant to be seen, had taken a month and a board vote and a wrong number and a 6-week battle with a shoelace, and the grace of a 63-year-old man from Detroit, and a journalist who drank her own coffee, and every hard, honest word spoken in the dark at 3 a.m. to finally arrive. But it had arrived. Yes, it was beautiful.